Welcome to the Clever Cow podcast, brought to you by the ISAID Grant. I'm your host, Savanah Nunes-Carpenter, and today's episode is a special one. I'm joined by Dr. Mark McGuire, University Distinguished Professor at the University of Idaho and the Program Director for the ISAID Grant. We're taking a big picture look at the dairy industry, where it's been, where it's headed, and how sustainability, research, and innovation are shaping its future. This episode isn't just about the ISAID Grant. It's about real-world dairy challenges and what producers need to know to stay ahead. From net zero goals to consumer trends, this episode is packed with insights for anyone connected to dairy. Let's dive in. So, Mark, you've spent your career working alongside producers, researchers, and industry leaders. What excites you most about the dairy industry today?
Savanah, there's still a lot of things that excite me about the dairy industry. I think probably first and foremost is it is one of the most modern, cutting-edge industries that I know. And so continued investment in innovation, I think, is going to be something that we'll see with the dairy industry. And now, some of the innovations that are coming down the line, we've moved from bulk tanks to artificial insemination to different kinds of housing. We're now using advanced genomic selection. It's just exciting what the dairy industry does to really improve its chances for economic survival. But I think that what really excites me is we have not hit that plateau for milk production per cow. And from a biological standpoint, and somebody who studied milk synthesis over his career, it's just incredible that we're not even close to reaching the potential for cows. And so that says there's a lot of opportunities to help with the cow side of things when it comes to sustainability and providing food for the human consumer.
Definitely. That was very well said. I want to talk a little bit about the evolution of the dairy industry. You touched a little bit on that. Dairy has changed a lot over the past few decades. What are some of the biggest shifts you've seen in the industry?
First and foremost is consolidation. And I grew up in Northern Illinois, and every corner in the rural areas had a dairy, and all that milk was shipped to the milk processor in town. And through my high school and college days, almost all those dairies disappeared and became large dairies that support larger dairy processing plants. And that's still true today. We've seen a reduction, I think, in the number of dairies in Idaho. When I arrived in 95, was about 1,000, and now we're down to 400 some. So that consolidation still is happening. And it means that larger dairies are becoming the norm, and that's just a practical reality from an economic standpoint and managing an operation for success.
I know it's discouraging for smaller producers to hear that, though. But, some of those things that just tends to be unavoidable as we become more efficient.
Yeah, efficiency's one part of it, but just the practical investment is enormous. And so to dilute those fixed costs of a parlor and land and cows, you really have to have a fair number of cows to be successful so that you can actually, have a family, raise a family, feed a family on your own. So it's a challenge. I don't know that the dairy industry is the only ag industry in that situation. I think it's most of agriculture has to go through consolidation because the margins are so small.
So I wanted to ask you, what are some misconceptions about dairy that you think people outside the industry don't understand?
I think part of that past answer, the practical need to have a larger dairy to be economically viable, to actually have enough income to feed a family, I think is something that the average consumer probably doesn't really appreciate. It's possibly tied into that perception of being a factory farm where, the cows are ignored for the most part and just forced to produce milk. And that just doesn't happen. So that's, I think, a perception that needs to be addressed. The other aspect of being larger is there's a substantial economic risk, financial risk for producers. And so understanding that these are not necessarily small businesses, I think in the official terminology, the U.S. government's terminology of a small business, a dairy with 500 cows is beyond that. It's has a lot of income has a lot of expenses too. So there's not a lot of net benefit in some years.
Well, yeah, and then everything that you make extra just goes back into the dairy. So
And it's a smart business, right?
yeah,
Investing in where your successes are, I think is a common part of agriculture, and for sure in the dairy industry. You know you can make milk. Well, I'm going to make more milk so I can have more income.
I saw a stat somewhere. I think it said around 97% of farms are family owned. And I really love that stat because I feel like people, dairymen, farmers, know where their roots come from. They are pretty decently like hands-on on the dairy with like management, and it's like their livelihood. It's not like this big factory where they don't care. They care a lot about cow comfort and just overall, they're making a product they believe in, like the overall nutrition of it, and they take really good care of their animals. I think that's something that the public has been getting to a place where they understand, but I feel like there's more work to be done with spreading that message.
Yeah, I think you're spot on there. Just because you may have to incorporate that operation from a financial risk and legal protection standpoint, it's still a family farm. Sons and daughters are working on that farm, and it's really the heritage of the family. And so for many cases, I would say that even though it may be big and have a fairly significant corporate approach, it's definitely a family farm still.
From an academic and research perspective, how has dairy science evolved over the years to help producers be more efficient and sustainable?
So there's been a number of steps forward, strides forward, leaps forward in the dairy industry in my career. When I was going to grad school or even as an undergrad, genetic selection was, we're proving bulls. And so you actually have to have the bull, and you're having to send data through DHI to the USDA to get it evaluated statistically. But now, we don't even really prove bulls. We're using genomic selection as the key there. So, that's been a big step. I would also say that, really precision feeding or precision nutrition has really changed. A long time ago, it was putting cows out on pasture and giving them some supplements. But now we're making sure that in every bite that cow consumes is a balanced nutrient package for her success, for her health. And if she's healthy, then she's much more productive. And so I think that's another key piece. Advent of sex semen. I mean, there's another whole aspect of, it was futuristic when I was going to grad school that we could see that you're only going to breed females or only males. And that has given the dairy industry some hiccups because of the challenges of the value of a heifer versus a bull, but it's also given opportunities like beef on dairy approach that's going on now, so that those heifers, you only need fewer from, the better cows. So what a technology, what an advancement that's occurred.
Yeah, as you've been listing off the things, I just have been getting chills a little bit. So the dairy industry has committed to net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050, and that's a pretty bold goal. What are the biggest hurdles that stand in that way?
Yeah, I actually think it's a very audacious goal. I don't know that it's reachable, but I think it's a goal that is supporting marketing, if you will. The biggest issue going forward to try to reach that goal is biology. The fact that we're dealing with organisms that have, evolved over millennia to fit into a rumen and coexist in that rumen based upon a variety of feedstuffs. And many of those bacteria that are in the rumen are relatively inefficient. And so they're going to produce methane, and it's going to be almost impossible to shut them down from producing methane. Although, there are products coming out on the market. We'll see whether they're economically viable or not. But we're really dealing with biology, whether it's the rumen or out in the lagoon or in a compost pile. We still have to deal with the fact that we have bacteria. We don't have no animals in a sterile environment. We don't live in sterile environments. And so it's going to be a real challenge just because of the understanding that bacteria are everywhere.
I heard this study that currently happened a couple of years ago where they actually fed seaweed to cows and it decreased the methane, which I thought was pretty cool.
Yeah, there's been a number of those studies out there showing that they can do it. And then there's the product that Elanco's trying to get on the market now, that 3-NOP that will reduce methane production. So there's a variety of different mechanisms. But I think to overcome the complexity of the bacteria in the rumen is going to be a challenge, a real challenge. We haven't done it very well in the past. We've learned to maximize what goes on as far as fermentation goes for the benefit of cows' production, and we certainly know what can cause perturbations or bad events in the rumen that make a cow sick. But to actually specifically reduce some of the pathways towards methane production, that's going to be a real challenge, I think.
Definitely, especially making sure whatever you're using is easily sourced too. I just mentioned the seaweed. Like, how are you gonna just get a bunch of seaweed to Idaho for us?
People have been working on that problem. We've known it's a problem. It's a clear inefficiency of rumen fermentation. Now, it would be great if we could reduce it from the standpoint that should mean that there's more nutrients going to the cow rather than just going out into the environment. But we'll see what happens over the next few years with regards to methane mitigation.
I mean, we've talked about the dairy bioeconomy before in the past in other episodes. We have a lot of nice inventions and anything can be achieved with science, you know what I mean? But is it going to be actually affordable? So I think that would also be a pretty big one that we need to get through.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question the return on investment is probably slowing the introduction of technologies on dairies, particularly I think tied to maybe not the cow impact, but the bioeconomy of finding extra value out of manure, whether it be a methane digester or just capturing the gases and nutrients from lagoons and elsewhere. There's a cost there, and I think investors haven't really determined what the value will be yet, or maybe it's insufficient for their interest in investment. I think it goes back to some of those misconceptions we talked about earlier, and the reality that any investment on a dairy takes a lot of financial backing. And so the financial risk is huge. And so you want to make sure that that's going to work on your dairy. It's going to fit into your management system, and it will provide you some return on investment. You're not just going to do it for the good of the environment or the good of people. There has to be some payback. We do live in a capitalistic society, and for good reason. I mean, it takes money to live, it takes money to operate, and so you want to see a return on some investment.
So sustainability means different things to different people. What does real practical sustainability look like on a dairy farm?
Well, we can talk about a nutrient balance. So nutrients in, nitrogen out. What's the sources? We want to maximize those nutrients that are leaving the farm as milk or beef. I mean, that really would be the most sustainable method. But we're dealing with that biological system where digestibility is not 100% of the feed. And so we're going to have manure to deal with, and there's going to be nutrients there. So the sustainability opportunities, I think, are really with converting more of what the feed nutrients are into milk or beef, and then finding ways to extract those nutrients out of manure and providing products that can be exported off the dairy. An additional revenue source, but really to capture those nutrients and sort of compete with commercial fertilizer as a new opportunity.
I don't know, I get really excited when we talk about cutting out commercial fertilizers. Phosphorus is traditionally mined, so that's not very sustainable. I feel like there's a lot of blood and sweat that goes into taking that out, and it's not always good for the environment. So finding a way to naturally get that out of the manure. Yeah, adding more value to a byproduct.
It's classic recycling, right? I mean, it's there. It's a source. The manure is a source of phosphorus. Let's use it to the advantage. Nitrogen is an end product of the petroleum industry, and let's reduce how much nitrogen we're using from petroleum. And so that should all be beneficial to the environment if we can find ways to capture those nutrients and export them off the dairy and in dry form so that we can reach more acres and essentially provide those crop nutrients from dairy manure further away from the dairies.
What are some of the most promising technologies or strategies being developed to help dairy producers reduce their environmental impact?
Yeah, so the goal of net zero is really being driven by methane feed additives for reducing methane production in the rumen, and I think are going to be pretty significant over the next few years. And there are a number that are coming forward. You talked about seaweed, but also this product that's going to be directly fed for that inhibition of methane production. Other technologies are out there. I mean, we have a number of anaerobic digesters still going in place, and hopefully we can successfully use those and convert quite a bit of that carbohydrate that's still found in manure into methane, and use that as an alternative fuel, whether it be for electricity or put in a pipeline. Those are ways for the dairy industry to be more sustainable. And then, finally, I'd say, particularly with the ISAID grant, that clean water machine is great opportunity. I think it's a relatively low investment cost to develop it, and it's a way to produce that nutrient-rich biochar out of lagoon water at this point, and in doing so, you're going to get that soil amendment that has in nutrient enrichments that hopefully will be able to be shipped miles away from a dairy and provide not only nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium to the plant, but also potentially have a carbon credit opportunity because that biochar is present there. Hopefully the results from the studies that are ongoing will show that it's a real beneficial endeavor, and will give some investors some interest in trying to move that technology forward.
So research often feels distant from the farm, but it plays a big role in shaping the future of dairy. How does research directly benefit producers?
I think research at its core is just creating knowledge, developing an understanding of principles, concepts that allow those concepts to be further developed into potential technologies or best management practices. I won't say we're learning for the sake of learning, but in reality, that's part of what we need to do. Is we just need to think, create that opportunity to think. What's off in the distance? I don't know. You've got Mendel, who's looking at genetics of peas. Are they smooth or are they wrinkled? And now we know that that's part of DNA because of what Watson Crick and Rosalind Franklin did in the 50s, and now we're doing genomic testing where we're looking at segments of it. So the science is just about building knowledge and then having people that can take that knowledge and be creative and developing technologies or developing processes. In research, whether it be dairy science or any other field of study, we're publishing in journals, but we're presenting at conferences with scientific peers, but also conferences with industry peers. And the dairy industry, I think, is one where, there's a lot of smart people that are active in the dairy industry in all kinds of fields, and they're always looking at ways to take information and use it for the good of the industry.
What are the most exciting areas of dairy research happening right now that could impact farms in the near future?
I think the methane mitigation story is going to be one it's critical for the industry. Well, maybe not for the next 4 years, depending on.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
I think the sustainability story is certainly heavily politically influenced. But I think, again, going back to just the efficiency of fermentation, if we can find ways to reduce methane production in the room, and that should mean that those cows could be more efficient. And so that would be a great thing. Hopefully would translate into more milk and beef. Should be better sustainability. It should be better economically. The other aspect is we're just starting to really think about the opportunities for manure as an economic driving force for dairy. The digesters are clearly showing there's potential, but we can do better. I think there's a lot of opportunity there, and it would be nice if some of the commercial fertilizer companies would see that and say, "Oh, this is our competitor. Let's invest in it."
Yeah, that would be incredible to just be able to take the phosphorus, nitrogen out of your manure and sell it straight to fertilizer companies. Then you wouldn't have to develop your own product. It could just go straight to them, and then just be a whole another product on the shelf. How do we ensure research actually gets applied on farms and doesn't just stay in academic journals?
What we have are this wealth of professionals that support the dairy industry, from nutritionists to animal health experts to financial experts to risk management folks who are dealing with commodity trading, selling milk in the future. And so I think those individuals are very in tune with what the knowledge that's being generated that's coming forward.
Obviously, like costs are rising, margins are tightening. What are some of the biggest financial challenges dairy producers are facing right
Well, I think since the new president's been in place, tariffs are going to be scary because one of the major, I think it's about 15 to 20% of dairy products are exported, and tariffs might might end up reducing the amount of milk dairy products that are exported. If that happens, that's going to have a real impact on milk prices and the income potential. That's the one that right now is most current in my mind as a risk. And the other part of that is for the U.S. consumer, the price of food continues to go up, and we have the cost of eggs as being not one that the average family can afford hardly anymore. And so we got to make sure that we keep food as reasonably priced as possible.
There's been a lot of talk about alternative revenue streams for dairy producers. What are some opportunities beyond just selling milk?
To me, the biggest one is valuation of the new nutrients that are in manure. I think it's just a great alternative, particularly tied to sustainability. I wish there was a market there, a strong market. The other is beef on dairy has been rapidly adopted practice to provide extra income, improve sustainability. I mean, maybe a challenge to the beef industry a little bit.
What do you think will happen with beef on dairy, like over the years, like with genetics and stuff?
Well, I think the genetics is already being utilized, the information there to make good selections, or you're implanting embryos into those bottom quarter or third of your cows to generate beef animals that are very acceptable for the consumer.
So earlier you mentioned carbon credits. I'm assuming you're hinting that you think there's a future in producers being compensated for sustainability efforts. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are that I'm very challenged by the carbon credit market because I don't know if I think if there's enough validity behind the numbers and security that if somebody buys that carbon credit because you're supposedly sequestering that carbon in soil, that it's going to be there forever. In Idaho, particularly where we have to till some of those fields a couple of times because we have root crops, potatoes and sugar beets that, what do we know enough to know whether that carbon will remain sequestered or is it changing? I really struggle to understand how carbon credits are going to be a part of the economics of the dairy in general, and that includes crop production, all the way back to methane mitigation, whether it be from the cow or from the living in the compost. I really want that direct pricing mechanism for the nutrients in manure. That would be, to me, the best way for a dairy producer to show value that is appropriate for sustainability. Lots of challenges. I think unknowns are a little bit too high for me for saying that this is a good funding mechanism to support sustainability.
Yeah, and who's to say what happens? Maybe like over time they'll refine it more and put more numbers out there so people can feel a little bit more solid about that decision.
That's right.
Hopefully that happens. So public perception of dairy has shifted a lot in recent years. What's one thing you wish consumers understood about the dairy industry?
I wish consumers understood how much effort it takes to be a good dairy producer. And that's managing cows, that's managing feed, that's taking care of the environment. That's all of those aspects, as well as in caring for employees, dealing with all the governmental regulations that are going on. And so really understanding the complexity, what happens on a good operation. I think all of agriculture, everybody believes, we can go just out and take a hoe and grow our own food. I just the appreciation for how food is produced is lacking in the country.
I think also just the perception of dairies themselves and dairymen too. I think the public, and this isn't everybody, but a lot of people that don't know where their food comes from, they think about like a dairyman milking a cow by hand or something, or they think they aren't educated for some reason. And that's totally not true. I mean, most dairymen happen to like go to college and get degrees, or even if they don't, they're applying themselves. They're constantly learning. They're innovating on their dairy. So for me, that's what I wish would change.
Certainly, anybody that's ever been on a dairy knows that you go through the school of hard knocks, and mistakes happen, and you're trying to innovate. But day-to-day operations, day-to-day management is an incredibly challenging perspective. Operationally, you think about the auto industry and how a car is built. Well, that happens every day on a dairy as well. You have to make sure that the feed is mixed properly, is delivered to the cows properly. Those free stalls or the lots are groomed regularly so the cow has a nice place to live. And then milking management is, if it's not taken care of, those cows could get mastitis. So you want to make sure everything is running and is fine-tuned, and you're doing this 24/7.
Yep.
365. There's no way you can avoid it. You can't take days off. It has to happen that way.
Yeah, growing up, my dad rarely took vacation time, and that's just a reality of it. So plant-based alternatives are becoming more popular, but dairy still has strong advantages. How can the industry position itself to stay competitive?
Well, I think today's conversation about ultra-processed foods suggests that the plant-based beverages are challenged. They should be at risk, right?
You'd
So
think.
it's really just adding this mineral, that mineral, this vitamin, and to a homogenate of a nut or a bean. I mean, it's really surprising. I think what the dairy industry needs to do is to say, this is the natural product. This is the one that has all these ingredients. Maybe we add vitamin D, vitamin A, and that's about it, right? That is it. And compare that label to the one on the plant-based beverage. So I think that is the push I would have. And from a human nutrition standpoint, they're not equal by any means. So if that mom is buying plant-based beverage for their child because they think it's a equivalent nutrient source, then they need to be educated, because it is not. I mean, I think the other aspect of the plant-based beverages is that I'm not sure they're sustainable. I think the likelihood is, in fact, they're less sustainable in various measures than what a dairy cow is. I don't know the numbers, but I know that, from various aspects, particularly with regards to water use, those nuts, those trees are very expensive and maybe not as efficient, particularly when you put on the calculation based upon, protein, energy, et cetera, that's being provided in that product to the human consumer.
Yeah, and the fillers they're having to put in there to try to mimic the creaminess of milk. You know what I mean? It's just all to try to get it to appear as close to milk as it can. But like through all of that, it's just becoming so processed.
Milk is not processed anywhere near the amount of a created beverage that's plant-based.
I totally have sympathy for people that are lactose intolerant, but there is lactose-free milk. There's products that have the proteins and enzymes broken down enough so that people can drink them.
If you actually look at a total dairy disappearance per capita in the U.S., it's actually continues to go up. We've just switched from drinking milk to eating cheese to an extent. And so that's, those are choices the consumer makes. And as long as dairy disappearance continues to go up, I think that's a good thing for the industry. Is there anything special about, getting the nutrients in milk versus cheese or yogurt? There's certainly different contents of the nutrients and matrix, but I don't think we really understand the impact of all of that on human nutrition.
So what role does consumer education play in maintaining trust in dairy, and how can producers be part of that conversation?
I mean, I think that's one thing that agriculture has really been struggling with, and maybe it's not agriculture, maybe it's really consumer sciences. We need to do better at telling the public where their food comes from and what is real food versus ultra processed food. How do you do that? Well, you have to have a team of people that are out in the public talking about it. Is that team of people dairy producers themselves? Well, I think they certainly play a role, to make sure that their facilities are open, that they encourage people to come and see where milk is produced and how milk is produced. I think that does great from just teaching that complexity. Certainly from a biosecurity standpoint, it may not be great. All food production needs to be more transparent. We need to show the public where the food comes from, and whether that be the local farmers market, where did they get that tomato or a head of lettuce, or where you get it out of, Winco or Albertsons? Where did that come from? How does it get produced? It would be great. I could see like a Mike Rowe doing not a dirty jobs, but here's food. How food is made. A TV show like that would be phenomenal.
I think it also starts in the schools too, like having some type of, maybe an elementary or something, have some type of little section that educates people about where their food comes from. It's like one of the most important things you can learn about. So I feel like that would be really smart. And that would, I think, bridge the disconnect. And then obviously for people already out of school, you can use like the methods that you just discussed.
We've ignored, I think, the school system, family and consumer science and industrial arts for a number of years. It's not sexy, and I think we need to go back and teach people, how to cook, how to take care of families, how to manage personal finances, all those aspects, and part of that is teaching them where their food comes from. Yeah, I mean, economically, the ultra-processed foods or prepackaged foods are all there, and it's really distancing people further from the ability to understand where their food comes from, or to cook, create a meal that is probably a lot less costly on our nutrient basis than what they're paying some large national food company to make.
So I want to discuss the future of dairy. If you had to predict, what do you think the dairy industry would look like 10 years from now?
It's going to be continued consolidation and integration. So dairy producers are going to realize that to make ends meet, they're going to have more cows, or potentially add value to the milk they produce by having their own processing plants. And these are not small mom and pop cheese operations. They're going to be large operations that are potentially exporting around the world. I think Idaho has been very creative in the dairy industry from that part of integration with dairy processing, where the producers realize that they need a source for their milk, and that's going to be their own dairy plant, if you will.
What's your opinion on robotic milking?
I think it has, some potential. The voluntary milking systems where the cow chooses require a fair bit of financial investment. So that's going to be a challenge to retrofit, particularly large dairies operations. I've seen a few in action, 1,000 cow freestall barns with multiple units there, but it's complex. And again, it's new technologies for the dairy industry that need to be accepted and understood how to take advantage of them. I think it goes away from the large opportunities for the typical Western dairies at this point. Smaller dairies.
Yeah, with the size, yeah.
Yeah, smaller dairies, I think, could benefit from that, but it's a major capital investment.
I think each machine is like $100,000, and I think you get a return on investment in about 10 years.
I just think we do so well with modern parlors, that is all about the labor force, right? It's, the challenge is finding the labor force and people that want to do that job. I think, I think they're good, decent jobs. It's kind of like an assembly line that's making cars that you do over and over and over again, that repetitive task. And I think those individuals are getting paid well, but to use robotics in those systems, I think it's going to be a real challenge. I know there's people trying to innovate in that area, but right now I think the labor approach is still the winner on a large dairy.
What's one piece of advice you'd give to dairy producers looking to stay ahead of industry changes?
Yeah, I hesitate to give any dairy producer advice. They have their mind of their own usually. I think first and foremost, it's, continue to have your eyes open for opportunity. I think they are innovative, very innovative, looking for ways to not only make more income, but to do things better. The other part is I'd say, keep your head up. The number of attacks the dairy industry has had over the years for animal welfare, for labor, for financial challenges, for the impacts on the environment. They're doing good. They're doing good. They continue to improve all their operations and take care of people. And so, try to keep positive. Most dairy producers I know are ornery, but they're also pretty positive. So that's a good thing.
You definitely have to have a good sense of humor.
Yeah. I mean, the other part of, advice is that there's many different solutions. The dairy industry is very innovative and has diverse operations. So to give one solution or any piece of advice really has to be specific to that operation.
Okay, now we're moving on to our fun rapid fire segment. And you don't have to answer fast if you don't want to. You can elaborate. What's one dairy technology that excites you most?
Well, I cut my teeth on bovine growth hormones, tropin, so that technology is still amazing to me, and it deals with the complexity of metabolism of the cow, and it's just every day I think about homeostasis and orchestration of metabolism, and I'm so grateful that I was able to work with some of the leaders in research in BST. It was the first biotech product that came to market, and it fueled the opportunities for biotech crops. It fueled human insulin as a biotech product, and it's still there. There's opportunity if we need it. It certainly would improve sustainability of the dairy industry, but we don't need more milk right at the moment. So that'll be maybe an issue down in the future. But right now, I still just kind of get shivers at how much we know about BST and how it works and how it's safe and effective. Yeah, there may be a place in the future.
What's your favorite dairy product?
It's cheese.
Yeah.
Variety of cheeses. I don't have any one specific preference. I like them all.
What's the best dairy conference or event you've ever attended?
Yeah, there's so many. I'm not sure I could come up with a single one. I try to regularly go to the American Dairy Science Association meetings, and that's where many of my peers and friends are there from the science world, and that rotates all over the U.S. and Canada. I love going to many of the meetings are in like cafes and restaurants around Magic Valley or Treasure Valley. A little more intimate. You get to visit with producers more, nutritionists. It's hard because there's been a lot of them over the years.
I feel like the people definitely make it though.
Yeah.
What's one dairy myth you wish you could bust?
Yeah, I'm probably, I'll think of two here. So one is that dairy producers mistreat their cows. It's not prevalent, but it's just there that people think that cows are stressed or not taken care of, and they don't understand that a producer would not be successful if they didn't take care of their animals. So that's one. The other is, there's a fair bit of the human population who believes that milk is only for, infants or neonates or even a calf, not for human consumption. And so it's a food. It's a food source. It's an excellent food source for humans, whether it be adults or kids. And so I continue to make sure that the consumer understands that dairy products fit into the human diet and fit well and provide high quality nutrients for life.
We're going to get a little bit more personal. You've spent much of your life dedicated to improving the dairy industry. What would your younger self think about everything you've accomplished?
Yeah, it's a little challenging from the standpoint. I don't think about accomplishments. I just think I'm doing the job and enjoying what I do. Generating knowledge, training individuals to be in the dairy industry, hopefully being impactful in the dairy industry. So what would my younger self say? I mean, I was influenced in a couple of ways to really get into the dairy industry. I didn't grow up on a dairy. A lot of friends were in dairies. I helped show dairy cattle in high school and college. I helped milk cows at times. I think what stimulated my interest in dairy is probably I had to milk a few of our beef cows and comparing that to milking a dairy cow. And it wasn't necessarily the beef cow really didn't want to get milked, and we had her tied up and still kicked the crap out of me. But it was just the volume. It was how are these two animals, which are very, very similar, so different in milk production? And so that was really spurred an investigation when I got to college more than anything else. I said, what's the biological difference? And it led me to move out of animal science into dairy science. I was in the last class of dairy science at the University of Illinois, and there were faculty in dairy science that were very engaged and helped me on my journey of investigation, if you will, of what the differences were. So my younger self is probably saying, yeah, keep an open eye, keep that interest in just generating knowledge or investigation to move forward. Again, you talked earlier about it being all about people. It was about people that influenced me. One of my high school friends and lived across the hall from me in college is Paul Van Raden, who ran the USDA dairy genetics program. I think he's retiring or has retired recently, and phenomenal mind. I mean, the math he can do is incredible, and he encouraged me to switch from animal science to dairy science, and simply because I was frustrated that I was put down a path where you don't think, you just do. And in the dairy world, there's a lot more thinking.
Mm-hmm.
I think because innovation is critical to the dairy industry's survival, and so looking back, it's keep thinking, and you never know where it's going to land you. Certainly, while I've done a lot on cow side I've also done a lot on the human lactation side, and I wasn't thinking about that as a younger self, and that of course is tied to my wife Shelley being a critical research partner, but that comparison of how lactation occurs in cows versus women has allowed me to be creative, allowed me to take expertise in one science field and apply it to another science field.
That was a really good answer. Yeah, I've had a wonderful conversation with you. Before we go, do you have any final thoughts or information you wish to share with our listeners?
Just want to tell them how awesome Savanah is in her job. Creative and spontaneous and fun. So thanks.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast. Well, that wraps up our conversation with Dr. Mark McGuire. Thank you so much for tuning in to the Clever Cow podcast. We hope today's episode gave you some new ideas to chew on as we think about the future of dairy. If you enjoyed this conversation, make sure to follow us on social media and subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you're curious about the research or people behind the ISAID grant, you can learn more at uidahoisaidgrant.com. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, stay curious, stay connected, and keep supporting sustainable ag.